Well, tonight it's my honor and a privilege to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. James Chestnut. Around the world, in the United States, Australia, France, Norway, Italy, Spain, and the list is growing and growing. He is now booking speaking engagements into 2010. His first degree is a Bachelor of Education in Physical Education. His second is a Master's of Science in Exercise Physiology. That allows him to interpret and collect the research that is out there. As I've mentioned, this material is changing lives. He is speaking about your daughter and your son and your parents and perhaps your future children, because you make the change now, you get to change the future generations. When you see him speak, it comes from a very personal place, because it is. Could you please help me and join me in welcoming Dr. James Chestnut.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Drs. Baxter and Copeland. There's some, I don't know why I'm a little bit nervous. There's some safety in being a few thousand miles away from home to do one of these. I can't see in the upper balcony. I don't know if my daughter's up there. You up there, Bubba? I love you, Bubba. I'm proud of you. That's the biggest part. I think that, and I'm, as Dr. Baxter mentioned, I'm very privileged now to speak all over the world. And no matter where I go, there's one thing that we seem to have in common everywhere, especially in the industrial world, and that is that we're losing our health at a great rate, that we're getting sicker and sicker as time goes on, not healthier and healthier. And the other thing is that I think that we all understand that health is our greatest asset. I would suggest, in fact, I know that there's none of you in this room, and I've spoken to tens and tens of thousands of people now, and it's the same response everywhere, is that there's really nothing that you would trade for your health or for the health of those that you love. Is that fair? Yeah. Right. And the other thing that's probably fair is that none of you right now are sitting in those chairs feeling that you're as healthy as you can be. Is that also fair? The fact is that we know that, and we openly admit that health is our greatest asset, that it's the single most important thing in our lives and the lives of those that we love. And we also openly admit that we're not expressing the level of health in terms of our potential. My question is why? And the answer to that is really what tonight's about. I think that most of you have already engaged today in some things that you know made you less healthy. You've also, most of you in this room, failed to engage in some things that you know would have made you more healthy. Is that also accurate? Yes. Right. It's the apple or the donut. I'll talk about it lots tonight. So therein lies the main issue. I think that what we've just discovered in just a few minutes is that you already understand how important your health is. You understand that you're not as healthy as you'd like to be, or in fact, I like to say deserve to be. But the reality is that our purpose on this planet is to be well. I believe everyone's birthright is to enjoy a long and vital and happy life. And if we're not experiencing that, if it's the most important thing in our life, and we're engaging in activities that we know are depriving us of that health, we have to step back and ask ourselves why. You already have enough information to make yourself healthier. So I don't believe you're here necessarily because you can't figure out how to get yourself better. Most of you already, well, not all of you already admitted that if you just did the things that we talked about already, if you just stopped doing whatever you did today that moved you away from health, and starting tomorrow you didn't do that anymore, and the things that you know that you didn't do today that you know would drive you towards health, if you started doing that tomorrow and kept doing it, and you did those things for the next 3, 6, or 9, or 12 months, would you all have greater health in a year from now? Yeah. Right. How many of you would agree that an apple is better than a donut in terms of your health? Yeah. Unanimous? Well, we got a few naysayers, but me too. In fact, I did a talk a couple years ago to all of the grade 5s in the school district 62, which is Victoria. And it was interesting because I asked them the same question. And I said to all these grade 5s, what's better, an apple or a donut? And they all said an apple. And I thought, well, boy, that's grade 5. So why don't we choose the apple over the donut? The answer is not because we don't understand that the apple's better for us than the donut. The answer is because we don't really understand the devastation of that donut and the devastation of missing that apple. The answer is really that at a conscious level, we have no idea really of the actual consequences of our choice. We are marketed literally to death, no pun intended. We are marketed to death to believe that our choices don't really have a consequence for us. We have things that we feed our children that we would not feed our dogs. I will see parents, take the potato chips away from their children because they're feeding it to the dog and say, sweetheart, don't feed that to the dog. It's terrible for the dog. These are for you. And I get that response wherever I go, but I will tell you that as you get this to a conscious level, I truly don't believe that any of you find it humorous to poison a child. And the truth is, the reason you can laugh at that is because you don't equate the truth with that potato chip or that donut going into that child's mouth. The truth is that you would be horrified, and you will be horrified this evening, to find out the actual truth about the consequences of that donut or those potato chips. And so if I step back, and I've been doing this for 24 years now. I turned 42 this year. And since I've been 18 years old, there hasn't been a day gone by where I haven't read some form of research trying to figure this out. The reason I figured it out is because I asked the right questions. I have the right, what's called a paradigm. Really, it's a belief system. And I'm going to transfer that belief system to you tonight because you all are already intelligent enough to figure out how to do it right. You're probably 70% there in terms of your knowledge base. Unfortunately, a lot of the knowledge that you have right now is misinformation coming from quote-unquote experts, and so we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. But I would say really there's only about a 30% tweaking that I need to do in your knowledge base. But that 30% is where the choices are. That 30% is really about the consequences of your choices. How many of you enjoy chocolate? All right, thanks, ladies. I already know. I can't see out there, but I'm sure all the ladies' hands went up. And I'm reading all the time, and I recently read a study that came out of Britain that asked women what was better, sex or chocolate. And they said chocolate, it lasts longer. What if I were to lace that chocolate with arsenic? Would you still eat it? I can tell you that it will taste the same. The texture in your mouth will be the same. Everything's the same, except there's some tasteless poison in it. Would you eat the chocolate or feed it to your child? No. Why? Because your belief system about the chocolate changed. If your belief system about the chocolate changes, your behavior regarding chocolate will change. You have to understand that you can't modify your behavior unless you modify your belief system. I'm here to modify your belief system. I'm here to make it accurate. But the truth is that there's a lot of people spending a lot of money out there to market you and market you and market you so that you don't have the right belief system, so you don't anchor the truth to that chocolate. That chocolate is poison, ladies and gentlemen. That donut is poison. Without that apple, you can't have a healthy, vital life, the one that you want for you and your children. I'm going to show you some research tonight. It's going to make you fall off your chairs because the data is staggering about what we're doing to ourselves. Let me take you on a little bit of a journey in terms of how I got to come up with the right question. I am the son of a PhD biologist. And although I wouldn't stand up here and give a dissertation on the greatness of my father in many areas, I would in this sense. And my mother as well contributed to this, and I think she's out there, so I better mention her or I'll be in big trouble. We grew up on a farm, and sometimes you have that 10-second rule, something drops on the ground, if you pick it up quick. Well, we had about a 10-day rule. And there just wasn't a lot of fuss and muss about, you've got a headache, you got to take a pill. It just wasn't like that. I grew up in that paradigm. But one of the things that was most significantly changed my entire life, and which has allowed me to deliver this message all over the world and change lives all over the world, is that I, from a very early age, realized that I was not outside of the ecosystem of the planet looking in, but that I was part of it. Most of my holidays when I was a kid, in fact, I never went on a vacation unless it was in the bush. And usually my dad and I would either go fishing all the time. I could probably fly fish before I could walk. But what that taught me and I'll tell you something else that fundamentally changed my life, is that I can remember even in my short life from when I was 5 years old and I would go fishing. By the time I was a teenager, there were rivers where when I was 5 and 6 and 7, I couldn't put my line in the water without catching a fish in minutes. And by the time I was a teenager, there was no fish left. I can remember going to mountain lakes that were so beautiful and so pristine that it would take your breath away to see these meadows. And by the time I was a teenager, they were gone completely. You couldn't find a tree. And so when I first started on this journey, I was really much more of an environmentalist or a conservationist than I was a humanist. My concern when I grew up mostly was about animals. I just loved animals. I would drive anybody who would listen crazy about some facts about animals or asking them about some facts about animals. And I think that, unlike my father, who really only wanted to save fish and deer so he could shoot them or catch them later, I actually wanted to save animals for the sake of the animals. And one of the things that was most shocking to me, I remember reading quite early on in my life, probably 18 or 19, was that one of the major things killing a lot of the salmon was the urine and the feces of humans because it was so full of drugs. And that was something that changed me for a long time. Then I started realizing about all the other pollutants that we were putting in. And I had this moment in my life where I said, there's nothing I can do for the animals unless I change the humans. You see, we choose whether or not the animals survive. My next big aha moment was I realized that I was one of the animals. The thing that changed my perspective, the thing that allows you to feed your children things that you wouldn't feed your dog, the thing that allows you to say, I just got to get my dog out for a walk, and leave your kid on the couch playing Game Boy. The thing that allows you to behave that way is the belief system that you're not an animal or a mammal. As long as people can convince you that your physiology is somehow magical and that you don't have the same consequences as every other animal, then they can convince you that you really have no hope and that your decisions don't really matter. The reason why you consume those things or feed them to your children is because deep down you don't really feel it matters that much. That's a fact. Because if you put arsenic in the chocolate, you wouldn't feed it to your kid because the amount of that it matters just went up. So the idea about changing your behaviors is changing your belief system, and really that is, how much does something matter to you? You don't equate those foods with early death and cancer and diabetes and heart disease and ADHD for your kid and acne and acid reflux and depression and anxiety and Alzheimer's and dementia. You don't equate the donut with that. And you don't equate the apple with significantly reduced risk of all those things and a happier, longer, better life. You think the donut might pack on a few extra pounds. You think the donut might make your kid a bit squirrely for a little while. The truth is, it's poison. The only way you're going to understand that is if you stop believing that you're somehow different from all the other mammals on the planet. I don't know whether that came from science, bad science, or it came from religion, but I can tell you it's quite clear now that we have totally lost the concept that we are part of the animal kingdom. How many of you can drink the water from a stream within 5 miles of your house? Now, we're in Victoria. This is God's country. I'm usually talking in, Manhattan. But I'll tell you that probably there's very few, if any of you in this room, who can drink water from a stream within 5 miles from your house. Was that true 300 years ago? How can we think that we can poison our streams and not poison ourselves? How can we think that the animals are dying in these streams and we're okay? That makes no sense if you understand science. How many of you would like to drink the water from the runoff of the farm that grows your children's fruit and vegetables? Now, does it make any sense that that would not concern us? I fly to Australia 3 or 4 times a year. That's a 17-hour flight at about 600 miles an hour over the Pacific Ocean. It's water the whole time. For that whole flight, there's not a spot in that ocean where we can't detect PCBs or fire retardant. The orca whales living here are so toxic now with fire retardant PCBs and DDT, which we haven't used since the 70s, that they fear for their existence. Out of Washington State, last year was a study where they looked at the maternal blood flowing from the mother into the fetus, and they found over 200 chemicals in it. So, God bless Al Gore, but I want to tell you that I'm not sure that global warming is really our biggest issue. And I'm not sure that it's not really a giant diversion from the real issue, which is to say, well, let me ask this question. Do we really care what temperature the earth is if it's so toxic we can't inhabit it or eat from it? Do we really care if it's 1 degree warmer or 2 degrees colder? If it's so polluted that we can't eat anything that grows from it or breathe the air that's on it? I'm not sure the temperature's the big issue, folks. But I don't think we're going to have a concept of that until we understand that we are an ecosystem. We live on a recycling depot. We literally drink dinosaur tears. The truth is, though, we also drink the urine and eat the feces and flesh of all our ancestors and all the chemicals they put into the planet. We are Earth. We are animated earth. There's nothing in you that is not earth. You cannot pollute the earth without polluting my daughter. And I can't pollute the earth without polluting you and your family. We live on a recycling depot. We have restaurants now where it says no animals allowed, and it's full of people eating. I did 14 years of post-secondary education. One of the things that surprised me the most was that I could study the physiology of a frog in the same class as a chimpanzee. But if I wanted to study human physiology, I couldn't study it. It was outside of the biological department. I had to leave and go to a different building to study about humans. There's this artificial division between our physiology and how we work and the rest of the planet. And that belief system has allowed us to be hoodwinked beyond belief about the consequences of our choices. When we can step back and see ourselves through the eyes of a biologist rather than a pathologist, when we can step back and understand that we are the sickest species on earth, there's no other species that comes close to the heart disease, cancer, obesity, diabetes, acid reflux, anxiety, depression, murders, anger, resentment, lack of feeling of belonging. We're in some trouble. And the truth is, until you understand why we're in trouble, then the things that you do to try to resolve it can't work. The two most important questions are, why are we sick? And what do we need to do to get and stay well? Now, as someone who makes a living and makes a life from helping people get well, I can tell you that I can't think of any other question that's relevant or any other questions. Why are we sick and how do we get well? The truth is, right now, the prevailing belief system about why we are sick is because of bad luck, bad germs, or bad genes. That's bad science. We are not sick because of bad luck, bad germs, or bad genes. We are sick because of bad choices. And we bioaccumulate the effects of those bad choices with time, and they catch up to us. As long as you believe that you're sick because of bad luck, bad germs, or bad genes, then you feel you have no power to influence your outcome in terms of your health. You feel that it doesn't really matter whether you have the apple or the donut because that's not really what determines your well-being. I'm here to tell you and show you with the best science in the world, from the best journals in the world, that what determines whether or not you're going to be sick or be well is how you eat, move, and think. What I want to get across to you tonight, and what I will get across to you tonight, is that once you understand why you're sick, then you can make some intelligent choices and be empowered to take control back. This isn't about assessing blame tonight. It never is for me, because assessing blame doesn't make anybody better. It's really about taking responsibility and empowerment. But if you don't take responsibility for your health, you have no chance. You have no chance. You can't buy your health. You can't get it in a pill form. You have no chance to be well unless you take responsibility for your choices and you teach your children to do the same. A truth's initial commotion is directly proportional to how deeply the lie was believed. When a well-packaged web of lies has been sold gradually to the masses over generations, the truth will seem utterly preposterous and its speaker a raving lunatic. I'll tell you that I meet a lot of resistance, and one of the most tragic ironies for me is that it's now controversial that how we eat is important. It's now a controversial topic to tell people that they're sick because they're eating Twinkies. You can't be sick because you eat Twinkies. Well, I can show you that, yes, you can, and you are. It's now controversial to think that people are sick because they don't exercise enough. Well, I can tell you that tonight you're going to learn that exercise isn't a choice to make you feel better and look better, although it will do both of those. Exercise is a required nutrient, just like oxygen. And your body cannot produce a state of well-being without daily exercise. It is not possible for you to produce a state of well-being without daily exercise. I will also tell you that your state of mind, whether you love yourself, whether you love others and forgive others, whether or not you have a sense of self-esteem, whether or not you feel that you contribute to whatever economy it is, whether it be a home economy or the economy around you, whether or not you have a sense of belonging to your own family group and your community group, that without those things, I'll tell you that you cannot be well. And this is not theory. I will show you the evidence. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. As I've gone through this 24 years of research, there's been a lot of times it would be more comfortable to be quiet. A lot of times. But I believe in every cell in my being that when you've done enough work that you can support your conclusion, I mean really support it. And that conclusion, whether it be against status quo or not, if the truth of that conclusion means that without it people are going to live a worse, shorter life, that people are going to die if they don't realize the truth of that conclusion, then I believe it's your moral obligation to get out there and talk about it. And that doesn't mean it's easy all the time. I spend a lot of time away from home, and there's nothing more important to me than being at home. But at some point we have to make a choice about what we're going to do as parents. I believe the greatest gift I can give my daughter, other than making her proud of me and loving her to bits, which I absolutely do, is to leave a legacy for her where she's got a better chance so that my grandkids, her children, will be well. Now, that would mean that she had to get married and a lot of other things if I'm going to have grandchildren, so I'm not sure that's going to happen. But when she gets out of the convent, she may or may not choose to go that route. I'm sure by then we can figure out a better way. When health is absent, wisdom cannot reveal itself, art cannot be manifest, strength cannot be exerted, wealth is useless, and reason is powerless. Isn't that a great quote? That's from 300 BC. Before we can really talk about health and wellness, we better understand what they are. Most of you don't. Most of the professionals I speak to haven't really thought about it this way. One of the great awarenesses that I had was that when I was young and I saw animal species going extinct, of all the species that I've ever seen get sick on the planet, I've never seen one get sick because of genes. Think about that for a second. Of all of the species on the planet, there hasn't been a single case of a species getting sick quite rapidly over 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years, and we've blamed genes. Not a single case. And so when I first started looking at this, I couldn't find an animal species that didn't get sick because of the environment, and really because of we as humans destroyed it. The other great place to study sick or find sick animals was to go in and see them in captivity. If we take a wild chimpanzee out of the wild and we put that chimpanzee basically into an environment that makes it live like us, does that chimpanzee get sicker or healthier? How many times out of 1,000,000? 1,000,000. I thought, well, that's interesting. And then I thought to myself, well, if I wanted to get that sick chimpanzee well, what should I do? What question should I ask? Should I ask how to label the sicknesses of that chimpanzee and figure out which drugs to give it? Or which body parts to remove? Should I create a whole system that's based on labeling the states of sickness of those chimpanzees so that I can give them drugs? Or should I say, what's different about these sick chimpanzees than these healthy ones? Now, in biology, that makes total sense. In biology, that's the first thing that comes to mind, which is if you start to see an animal get sick, they don't automatically say it must be genes, because that's ludicrous. What do they say? What's going on in the environment of that animal that's making it sick? Is that fair? Right. So that's what I did. And I said, well, if I studied the healthy animals in the wild and I compared them to the sick animals in captivity, the first thing I learned was that there was no difference in their genes. The second thing I learned is that we could always attribute their illnesses to their lifestyle change. So it would be absurd beyond belief to think that the way to get sick chimpanzees well is to add drugs or take away body parts. The only thing that made sense was to say, listen, chimpanzee in the wild, what you need to do is eat, move, and think like, in captivity, you need to eat, move, and think like the chimpanzees in the wild. Does that make sense? Right. Then I started studying humans. And the first thing I decided was that humans were animals. That was a profound difference between everything else I studied. It was an aha moment for me that changed everything. As soon as I admitted the truth that human beings were an animal species, a mammal species, then all of the information out there seemed to make no sense, just like that. If we look at what happens now, if we look at the research on human beings that are sick, what we're doing is that we all live in captivity now, that we're all sick. And the problem is we're now, in the medical research, we're calling sick people well. We're saying we studied 24 healthy subjects. And now you look at and how do they define health? How do they define that as a healthy subject in their study? As somebody who lives the genetically congruent lifestyle for a human being? Or as somebody who doesn't have the diagnosis of the thing they're studying? Someone who doesn't have that diagnosis. You're studying heart disease. If you don't have the diagnosis of heart disease, you're a healthy subject. Does that mean that they look in the mirror and say, wow, you're a good person? Does that mean that they're not depressed? Does it mean that they can do 5 chin-ups? Does it mean that they can jog 2 miles without stopping? Does it mean that they love themselves? Does it mean that they have positive self-esteem? Does it mean that they eat good foods? No, healthy doesn't mean any of those things anymore. What's happened is we started to call sick humans healthy, and now we think all human beings just naturally get sick because of their genes. No evidence, mind you, but that's our belief system. So the question I asked was, well, wait a minute. If these animals, if I have to openly admit, and people like Boyd Eaton, MD, PhD, and people like Cordain, there's a lot of great people out there who pushed me in this direction, certainly. But what I'll tell you is that if I start to ask the question, which is, what does a wild human look like? Are there any healthy humans? I thought that was an interesting question. The answer was, yeah. They're called hunter-gatherers. And hunter-gatherers are wild human beings living outside of captivity. If you were to see that, how many of you have seen that ridiculous picture where you've got a bunch of dogs sitting around a table smoking cigars, playing cards? See, you got to giggle. Good for you. Well, the truth is that that's no more ridiculous for the dogs to do that than you, based on your physiology. You smoking a cigar, living in artificial light with carpet full of toxins, drinking alcohol, and eating potato chips, playing cards, it's no more absurd for the dog to do that than you, based on your physiology. That's the thing we're missing. That the consequences to those dogs for doing that are no different than the consequences to us to do that as humans. So when I looked at these hunter-gatherers, what I realized was if we study hunter-gatherers, we find populations, even the old ones, think of the natives living right here before Whitey showed up. Whitey showed up with what? White bread, white flour, white sugar, white milk. Excellent, Whitey. And how was that? When we said, don't eat that sockeye salmon and those fresh berries, that's barbaric. You need Whitey. And when they started having Whitey, how did that go for them? Did they get sicker or healthier? Was it their genes? But we actually have people now arguing that because native populations have such high obesity levels that it has to be genetic. But how can it be genetic? Think about family history for a second. You know, I love family history. In fact, if you invest in pharmaceutical companies, well, you'll probably go to hell, but if you invest in pharmaceutical companies, here's the beautiful thing about family history, is that if you go into your medical doctor and they say, did any history of heart disease in your family? And you say, no. And they say, well, take these pills. And then they could say, well, do you have any history of heart disease in your family? You could say, yeah. And they say, well, take these pills. It's win-win. Either way, you're getting the pill. The problem is family history is absurd unless you go back 40 generations because we know our genes haven't changed for tens of thousands of years. So think about the natives right here. And if we went and studied those natives before Whitey showed up, how much obesity would we find? Pardon? How much heart disease? Diabetes? Cancer virtually unheard of. Acid reflux? ADHD? No. After one generation of them eating like Whitey, what would we find? They're sick. Now, if you did a family history in that first generation that started eating white foods, what you'd find is you'd say, do your parents have this? And they'd say, no, there's never been a history of this in our tribe ever. And they'd say, oh, take these pills. And then, by the way, not change your lifestyle. Not stop doing the things that are driving you away from health, but take these pills. And then if you ask their kids, when they get old enough to get chronic illness, which is getting younger and younger now, isn't it? We're doing really well. We got chronic illness now by age 6. We had to change the name of adult onset diabetes to type 2 diabetes because so many children have it. They don't catch it, ladies and gentlemen. They develop it. They earn it. You earn it with hard work, dedicated hard work. You can't get a chronic illness without years of dedicated hard work. They don't come overnight. It's not from one bad meal. It's not from one bad choice. It's not from one missed workout. It's years of dedicated work at suicidal lifestyle choices, day in, day out, so that you bioaccumulate the effects of that and develop a chronic illness. You can't get one without hard work. So if they ask the kids of that first generation, do your parents have this? They'd say, yeah. And they say, aha, we knew it was genetic. Take these pills. So when I started looking at these hunter-gatherer people, I said, wait a minute, here's a bunch of humans that are living outside of captivity that are really well. Does that mean to say that, they didn't get deep infections from trauma? No, they got those things, but they didn't get chronic illness, even the ones that lived to a ripe old age, which was about 20%. The ones who didn't live to a ripe old age didn't die of cancer, or diabetes, or heart disease, or heart attacks, or any of those things. They got hurt from trauma. They starved to death or were killed by trauma or deep infection from trauma. Hunting a mammoth with a stick can be dangerous. So the next thing I asked was, well, wait a minute. What is the difference between the healthy humans that we can study? And there's lots of them. The Aktung in Malaysia, the Aboriginals in Australia, the natives here, the Inuit up in Greenland, some of the tribes down in South America, the Pygmies in Papua New Guinea. We've actually got some real great data from these people living today, although we're destroying the planet at such a rate that they're probably not going to be able to live that lifestyle much longer, which is tragic in my opinion. But they could teach us so much. But we were told to shut up and butt out about our health. We were told to leave it to the experts. The truth is, you need to be the expert. If you're not the expert, you have no chance. You cannot leave health to anybody but yourself because it's your choices that are going to determine your health. You can't blame anybody else. You have to take responsibility for that. But you have to have some knowledge so that you can do that. Give them a fish or teach them how to fish kind of thing. So when I looked at the difference between the hunter-gatherers and the wild humans in captivity, which is now all of us, what I realized was the genes didn't change. That was profound for me. That was against everything I had heard from all the smart people I admired my whole life, including my dad. He didn't get it until he got really sick. And then I said, okay, wait a minute now. Now I've got some work to do. Because if it's not genes and everyone thinks it's genes, we've got some work to do. Then I thought about it for a second. Do you remember when all the fish died in the Great Lakes? Do you remember when the Great Lakes started to die off in the 70s? Yeah? Do you remember when they started washing up on the shore with tumors and they were sick? And do you remember the birds that ate those fish, their eggs were brittle and they were not producing offspring and were very worried about the extinction of the birds as well? Is that fair to say? Okay. How many of you think any biologist in their right mind would get up in front of you and say, clearly the problem we have with the fish in the Great Lakes is genes? The reason the fish have cancer and are overweight and diabetic and have all these other issues is because of genes. And so the solution is to dump drugs into the lakes or set up little tiny fish hospitals with little tiny fish tools on the shore of the lake. And when they wash up, we'll try and give them surgery before they're dead. How many of you think that would be logical? Why would you think it logical for the human species? Why would it be so silly that we could giggle about it if it was fish, and yet not so silly if we start talking about human beings? There's a couple of reasons. One of them is because it's very uncomfortable to talk about sickness. Sickness is a human tragedy. And so when we're talking about people who are ill, it's very, very difficult to mention the fact that they had some role in it. That's a hard thing to do. It's not comfortable for me to do it. But if I don't do it, it's more uncomfortable. If I don't tell you the truth and I let you go ahead and commit suicide with your choices because I didn't tell you the truth, then everyone I didn't tell the truth to haunts me. So I'm going to tell you. And I'll also tell you this, that I've got the data to back it up. And I'm going to show you that data tonight. But that's an uncomfortable position. A lot of you are going to go through some uncomfortable spots tonight. A lot of you are going to find out tonight that you could have done a better job for your own lives, and you could have done a better job for the lives of your children. And what I'll tell you is, it doesn't matter. You can't change the past. Guilt can't serve you, so don't worry about it. But for me to avoid telling you the truth because I think it might hurt your feelings, and therefore to let you just go off and kill yourself, well, that's not ethical, and that's not moral. Can we all agree that if we are studying a rainforest, let's just say the trees in the rainforest, and we're going to call that the rainforest for now. I know there's many other things that make up a rainforest, but bear with me. Would it be fair to say that if a rainforest is made up of individual trees? Is that fair to say? Okay. And is it fair to say then that the health of the whole ecosystem of the rainforest is based upon the collective health of the individual trees together? That as go the individual trees, as go the rainforest. Fair? Is it fair to say that you're made up of individual cells? right? So is it fair to say then that your health as a whole ecosystem is based upon the health of your individual cells in a collective? As goes the health of your individual cells, as goes your health of your whole ecosystem. Fair enough? If all of your cells are healthy, you're healthy. If some of your cells are sick, you're sick. Fair? Well, let's do it this way. In science, we call a state of proper function or a state of balance and harmony, we call that homeostasis. So I'm not going to use that term again. It doesn't matter. But just think of it. If all of your cells are in a state of balance and harmony, they're not in any form of stress, they're in a state of balance and harmony, we will call that 10 out of 10 on the scale. If none of your cells are in a state of harmony, that means you have 0 out of 10, you're dead. Anywhere in between 0 and 9.999 repeater means you're less well than your potential. So if we're at 10 out of 10, is it possible for us to be sick? No, it's not possible, because sickness by definition is what? A lack of homeostasis, a lack of balance. What sickness really is, ladies and gentlemen, is that it's your cells in a state of adaptive function. It's your cells in a state of adaptation to some form of stressor. Now, let me ask you some important questions about this. First of all, is there anyone in this room who believes that your state of self-function is random chance? Okay, I can't see everyone, so if you do, scream. Perfect. Is there anyone in this room who believes that you're genetically programmed for sickness? Have you ever seen a study? Or, conversely, do you think that you're genetically programmed to keep striving for homeostasis? If I put you in the cold, you'll shiver to try to get back to normal. If I cut your finger, you're going to try and heal it. Understand? That really the definition of life is our ability to strive for homeostasis. That's what we're doing constantly. We're in a world that has a lot of stressors in it, and what we're programmed to do is keep trying to get back to a state of balance. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So, watch now. Why would we move away from a state of balance and a function? It's not random chance. It's not genetic programming. Why would we ever not be in a state of full health? Stressors. Some form of stressors. Now, does that stressor, here's the most important point. Does that stressor come from inside, genes, or does it come from outside, environment? That's the key question. The prevailing belief system right now is that you're sick because it comes from the inside. That's not true. The reason we move away from a state of balance is because we have some stressors on the outside. Let me ask you another important question. If it's fair to say then that if we're at 7 out of 10, are we sick? Are we sick? Yes, we're sick. Are we sicker if we're at 5 out of 10? Are we really sick if we're at 1 out of 10? Okay. And if we go from 7, if we want to get healthy, if we're at a 7 out of 10, what's the only way that we can improve our health and well-being? We have to move towards 10. We don't have to get to 10 to have improvement. We have to get to 10 to reach our potential. But if you're sick, we have to move this way. Yes? I want to explain to you something very important. There are only 2 reasons why you would ever not be in a state of 10. There are only 2 reasons. This is going to answer the question, why are we sick? There are only 2 reasons why you'll ever be sick. One is that you're dumping something into your ecosystem which is toxic. You are dumping something into your ecosystem which is toxic. That can also be a thought, by the way. The only other reason why you'll ever get sick is because you're not putting something into your ecosystem which is required to express homeostasis. You are not putting something in, you're not putting an essential nutrient into your ecosystem, which is a genetic requirement in order for you to produce 10 out of 10 homeostasis. Make sense? Toxicity and deficiency are the root cause of all illness in all living things. Now, if you have toxicity and deficiency in your life, your body's going to go into a state of adaptation because it wants to survive. If you're at a state of 7 out of 10, remind me one more time, please, what's the only way we can get well? We must move towards 10. Are we in, everybody's in agreement? Which does that, drugs or surgery? That's an important question. Because the truth is, I will never stand up here and say that there's never an adequate or an appropriate time to take a drug or surgery. What I'm saying is there's never an appropriate time to take a drug or surgery if you believe it's going to move you towards homeostasis and solve your problems. The only way to solve a problem caused by toxicity and deficiency, ladies and gentlemen, is to remove the toxicity or add the thing that you're deficient in. That's it. We have an entire system which we call healthcare, which has nothing to do with either of those. That's the problem. That doesn't mean to say they're not phenomenal at sometimes stopping us from shooting towards zero. And we should all be grateful for those things. I am. Medicine has saved my life. And I'm eternally grateful for that. But the truth of the matter is, and as difficult as it might be, the truth is there's nothing in drugs or surgery that's going to allow us to be well, and there's nothing in drugs or surgery that's going to mean that we don't need drugs or surgery. There's nothing in a drug and surgery focused system that stops you from going in for drugs or surgery. There's no prevention or wellness in drugs or surgery, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to show you some figures tonight that are just, you're going to be in shock. So once we understand what health is, then we have to understand, and once we understand why we're moved away from health, stress is a very important component of what we're going to talk about, because Hans Selye, who was a Canadian, very famous Canadian researcher, let us know what stress does. And what Hans Selye proved was that any stressor that we have, our body responds to in the same way. So if you eat a bad meal, that's a stressor. If you don't eat a good meal, that's a real stressor. If you don't exercise, that's a real stressor. If you carry bad posture around all the time, or your spine's not moving properly, that's a real stressor. If you think negative thoughts about yourself or others, that's a real stressor. If you don't think enough positive thoughts about yourself, that's a real stressor. If you have toxins in your environment and pollutants, that's a real stressor. What Hans Selye taught us is that our body responds to any stressor the same way. The analogy I like to use is, imagine that if you're born, and you're born in a swimming pool with water wings on. Do you know what those are? Water wings? Well, in Australia, I was just down there, and they said, oh, that's a floaty. And I said, well, I'll tell you what a floaty is in Canada. And I'm not sure I'd want to put one around my arm. But anyway, when in Rome. So if you can imagine yourself with two floaties around your arms in a swimming pool with a backpack on. And genetically, I mean, we could go back and forth and argue this a little bit, but it seems to be fairly well accepted that genetically, human species has got about 120 years in us. And I'm going to talk to you about aging tonight and explain that. But basically, if you can think of being born in a swimming pool with a backpack on, with the water wings on, and those water wings have a very slow leak. And that very slow leak means that the water will run out of those water wings in about 120 years. That's your lifespan. So if you're born into that pool, and there's no waves at all, there's no stressors at all, you're just going to float happily around in there, and you're going to get your 120 years. Get it? Right. Stress in your life is a rock in the backpack. Any form of stress in your life is a rock in that backpack. Now, what happens is when you get that rock in your backpack, a couple things that are very important occur every single time. The first thing is that you sink a little bit lower in that water. What does that do to the pressure on your water wing? It increases it. What does that do to the rate of air leakage? So what does it do to your rate of aging? It means you're going to have less time on the planet. The other thing that happens is when you sink a little lower because you got that rock in your backpack, the other thing that happens is what? That day-to-day life becomes a little bit more of a struggle. You've got to work a little bit harder to keep your nose above water. So two things always happen when we put stress into our life. The first thing is that we lose our lifespan. Our cells start to divide quicker, we have more cell damage, and we actually have less lifespan. But more importantly, the quality of our life also decreases. And life becomes more of a struggle day to day. And what I'll tell you is it does not matter what drug you get when you're in that pool with that rock in your backpack. The only thing that matters is getting the rock out of the backpack. And what I want to talk to you about tonight is taking control about what rocks go in and what rocks you're going to take out. And understanding that there's nothing in the treatment of the issues that come from having that rock in your backpack that are ever going to solve the cause of the issues. And until we address the cause, we have no hope. And the cause is not bad genes or bad germs or bad luck. It's bad choices that put rocks in our backpack. If we were to talk about wellness, wellness is really, I always say it came out of Berkeley in the 60s. Why? Because they were smoking a lot of dope, hugging trees, eating granola. And what happened? That's funny. This is a tough crowd. That's a big hit down the States. You know what I mean? Yeah, this is BC. And I guess dope isn't funny here, right? Because you're all growing it. But anyway. Everyone's a little tense. How does he know, you know? And this is being filmed. So, all the grow-ups, I apologize. But in Berkeley, what started to happen is that people started to realize that the concept of health was totally lost. That health stopped meaning being in a state of homeostasis. And it began to mean just not having a medical diagnosis. And they said, that's not health. Just because you don't have a diagnosis of something doesn't mean you're well. And so they kind of came up with a concept. And the other thing they did was they said, and we also can't think of health as just, physical. We have to understand that the mind-body and the body-mind connection, we can throw spirit in there too if you're comfortable, that health is really being in a state of balance in mind, body, and spirit. And that's really all that wellness is. Wellness is the recognition that we are beings, that in order for us to be healthy and well, that we have to have balance and harmony in mind, body, and spirit. That regardless of how well your body is, in fact, your body can't be well if you have negative thoughts all the time. Fair? In order to fully understand the scientific truth about why you get and stay sick and how you can get and stay well, I need to give you a crash course in 5 fundamentally important scientific topics. We already talked about holism a little bit. Stress and chronic illness, genetics, environment, the aging process, and lifestyle choices in chronic health. Well, we talked about this a lot. One of the things I will talk to you a little bit about is the plant analogy. And the reason I say that is because it gives you an idea. Watch what happens now. If you had a wilting plant, what would you do? Everybody says water. Why? Why wouldn't you say drugs? Because if you got a sick kid, what do you say? If you're sick, what do you say? So why did you say the plant, water? Because inherently your belief system is that the plant isn't genetically programmed to wilt. That if the plant is wilting, it must be toxic or deficient, probably deficient in water. Fair? Automatically, when you think of nature, you think that nature's programmed for success. That's the whole concept of Darwinian theory, that nature is programmed for success. And yet, if I talk to you about humans, it's a completely different answer. Anyway, let's get back to the plant. Let's imagine for a second, because I want to talk to you about the research, because there's all kinds of research out there, and there's all kinds of experts in all kinds of areas of research. But the reality is that I need you to be an expert in figuring out if that research is really relevant to whether or not you're going to get and stay well. So let me give you an example. Imagine if all of you were wilting plants. And I'm going to divide you. The gold standard in research is a randomized double-blind controlled trial. What does that mean? It means that we randomly put your names into a computer, and the computer randomly assigns you a number. Randomized control means that we're going to control the other variables other than the one we're studying, which is an absolute joke if you're doing human studies, because can we control the mind of a human being? Do we know that the mind of the human being plays a major impact in the results of all studies? So it's not a controlled study ever, but anyway, I'll let them have it. Double-blind means they poke your eyes out. No, double-blind means that the researchers don't know who's in what group. The researchers don't know which is the placebo and which is the sugar pill or the real intervention, and the statisticians don't know. The data collectors don't know. Nobody knows what's what, so there can be no bias apparently. Okay? So now, if you're a pharmaceutical company, what kind of questions are you asking? Do you think? What kind of research is out there really? It's, can this pill do what? Make you feel better. Can it change a symptom? They're not saying, can this pill make you well? Can this pill get you back to homeostasis so you don't need any more pills? No, pharmaceutical companies don't engage in research that says, what can we do to get these people off pills? They don't. And so and also you have to understand that most people are studying sickness, and what they're really saying is, how can we make these sick people feel better? They're not saying, how can we get these sick people well? That's not the question, ladies and gentlemen. The question is, how can we make these sick people feel better, or how can we make these sick people what? Maybe a little less sick. How do they define sickness? By symptoms. So it's really about symptoms. So let me just give you an example now of the danger of this. Let's say that I divide you all into 2 groups. This half of the room, I'm going to give you real water. This half of the room, I'm going to give you fake water. Okay? At the end of 6 or 8 or 12 weeks, the gold standard double-blind trial, all of you are still wilting. What is the conclusion of the study? That water is no good for wilting plants. In fact, anyone who offers wilting plants water is a quack and not practicing evidence-based care. But you might say, wait a minute, without water, plants will die. That's not the question they asked. They asked whether or not water can make the plant wilt less, change the symptoms. If the water can't change the symptoms, by definition of how they define better, which is less wilting, water's useless. Now let's think about that for a second. I want you to think about this now. The same subjects, the same data, the same study, the same intervention, everything's the same, but I changed my question. I changed my question from a sickness question to a wellness question. And I say, can water make these plants move towards homeostasis? Same data, same everything. Now, the plants that were missing water, that I gave water to, did they get better? Think about it for a second. Stop. I'll back up. Plants need water. Yes or yes? These plants don't have any. Okay? I give them some. The right amount. Did they get better? Depends how you define better. If you define better by symptoms, and they're still wilting, they did not get better. If you define better by moving towards homeostasis and balance and having better functioning cells, then anyone who got water got better. That's a big difference, isn't it? We better start asking ourselves how we should assess interventions. Should we assess interventions by whether or not they can make the plants wilt less, or by whether or not they make the plant healthier? What makes more sense to you if you want to get healthy? Right. We're not asking those questions right now in that kind of research. But you might say to yourself, well, why are the plants still wilting? And I'd say, great question. Maybe they're also missing nutrients in their soil. But you see, if you're not asking what the plants are missing, you'd never do that study. You'd just come up with a different drug to see if you could stop it from wilting. If the leaves were brown, you can't figure out something you could inject into it to make them green. You'd never ask what was causing the problem. You'd assume it was genetic. You'd never ask what toxicity or deficiency caused the problem. You'd never do that if you're studying sick humans. That's not the questions they ask. I'll ask it for you. Let's now say that we're going to give the plants water and nutrients. So the group at the back, I apologize, you get fake water, fake nutrients. This group gets real nutrients, fake water. The group at the back there gets real water, fake nutrients. This group, for my favorite, are going to get real water, real nutrients. So at the end of the study, all of the plants are still wilting. Now, this is the gold standard randomized double-blind controlled trial. At the end of the study, all the plants are still wilting. What is the conclusion? That water and nutrients are no good for wilting plants. Anyone who offers that is a quack, not practicing evidence-based care. But wait, you might say, without water and nutrients, those plants will surely die. Sorry, that's not the question. We define better in the allopathic or medical system as less symptoms, at least in that research, the drug research. So if you want to define it as a physiologist, which is where my master's degree is in physiology and function, then you would say, well, I'm going to define better by whether or not they move to homeostasis. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let me ask you this question. If we know that plants need water and they need nutrients in the soil, and we give them plants and the very nutrients they need, did they get better? Yes. Right. Why are they still wilting, you might ask? I'd say, excellent question. I'd say maybe they're not having enough sunlight. So now we've got a lot of groups, don't we? We got fake, sorry. Fake, real, different fake, real, real, fake, real, fake, real. I better get a lot of applause out of you at the end. So now what happens at the end of that 6, 12, whatever week study? 3 months, I don't care. You're all still wilting. Conclusion? Water, sunlight, nutrients, no good for wilting plants. Anybody who sells those things to plants or offers that as care is a quack, not practicing real evidence-based care. Truth is, how should we actually define it? Let me ask this question. If they need sunlight and they got it, if they need nutrients and they got it, if they need water and they got it, did they improve? Yes. Why are they still wilting? Well, because somebody's dumping diesel fuel into the ditch up the road, and it's getting into their system and poisoning them. The moral of that story is it's twofold, actually. The first moral is to say that we have to be very careful about when we start talking about evidence-based and research, because we have to know what question they asked. That's huge. See, science can't tell us which question to ask. Science can't give us any information which is qualitative. Science can only give us information which is quantitative. Science cannot tell us which questions to ask. Just because you have a whole bunch of science doesn't necessarily mean you ask the right question, ladies and gentlemen. And the other thing, the other moral of the story, is that you need to be what? Pure and sufficient at the same time for a period of time in order for you to get well. And you can't address only one thing. There's no point going in and saying, well, only addressing one issue. If you don't address your entire ecosystem, then you have no chance of getting well. And I will tell you from experience clinically that a lot of times when people, if you're only doing one thing, even if you're doing 2 of 3 or maybe 3 of 5, that sometimes you don't see any clinical real results until you're doing 5 of 5. And sometimes it takes a great deal of time for that to kick in. And we are in a society now where we say, well, I'm going to try this, and if it doesn't work in 3 visits, I'm out. And yet you go home and you're, eating, moving, and thinking in ways that are clearly toxic and deficient. And yet you're expecting a miracle from a practitioner. And then you say, well, that's not working. I'm just going to go get the drugs. You'll give the non-drug practitioner about three visits to fix your, 25-year issue. And if it doesn't work, you go get the pill and say, I should have gone and got the pill anyway. I knew it. That's a human tragedy. Chronic stress. Let me tell you a little bit about what stress does to you so that you can really understand. And can we all agree that that donut is stressful? Is that a stress or is that a rock in our backpack? Anything that's a rock in your backpack is driving you away from health. I need to bring these things to your conscious level. Then I'm going to teach you how to change. That's the most important thing. Many of you in this room have already tried many times to change your behaviors and it didn't work. Do you want to know why? Because you tried behavior modification and that just can't work. Belief system, behavior. Belief system, behavior. Belief system always determines behavior. I love chocolate. Behavior, I eat chocolate. Behavior modification. I love chocolate, I'll never eat chocolate. I love chocolate, I'll never eat chocolate. But I love chocolate. I hate exercise. I hate exercise. I'm going to get up at 5:30 every morning. I hate exercise. I'm going to get up at 5:30 every morning. Usually that happens before the first morning. The truth is that you've all tried to modify your behaviors in the past, and then when that very poor strategy failed, you told yourself that you were a failure. You told yourself that you didn't have enough willpower. That's absurd beyond belief. Someone didn't give you the right tools. This is why Jenny Craig makes all their money on return customers. Isn't that true? I will tell you that the reason that you're not successful is better than sex. And then so you can actually work on your belief system without any stress. But the truth is, remember that rock in the backpack? I want you to understand that moving your behavior away from something you like is a rock in your backpack. It's very stressful. You can't do it. Even an amoeba in a petri dish won't move away from something it likes or towards something it doesn't like. And you're about 75 trillion amoebas hanging out together. That's what you are. So once you understand the real concepts of human change and stop trying to modify your behaviors and start working on your belief system, about anchoring the right things. You want to know how to get rid of any of you have some of the foods that you just love, hard to get out of your life? Fair? You want to know how to get rid of them? You ready? Eat it naked in front of the mirror. By the way, it needs to be a 3-way mirror so you can see your bottom. And I suggest you do it while bouncing on a mini tramp. Now, you try that and you let me know how it goes. Please send photos. What stress really does, and understanding that the whole concept of the reason I've had such great success with this is because I allow people to change by floating downstream towards health instead of struggling upstream against it. Many of you now equate getting healthy with deprivation. The truth is, the deprivation lies in staying sick. That's where the deprivation is, not in being well. And I will tell you that once you change your belief system, that once you start exercising regularly, you would be devastated if you couldn't. Once you start eating healthy foods, you couldn't go to McDonald's and have French fries. It would just make you feel sick. The reason your body goes into a state of adaptation or stress is there's only one reason only. It's not a mistake. Even though if you stay in that stressful state, it can actually kill you, it's not because your body's inherently stupid. It's because your choices were inherently stupid. There's no such thing as pathological function. There's only pathological choices or pathological environments. But the reason your body goes into a state of adaptation or stress, do you know what that means? That when your body goes into that state of stress, when you got a rock in your backpack, your body literally starts to eat itself in order to buy time to survive. The only reason your body goes into that, what's called catabolic or stress state, fight or flight, you might have heard of it. The only reason your body does that and releases the cortisol and the catecholamines or adrenaline, noradrenaline, all those things that you've probably heard of. Cortislim is everywhere now. But the reason your body goes into that state is to buy you time to survive. If you're on an iceberg, what happens? Do you pull the blood away from your extremities into your core? Yes or yes? Is that stupid or smart? Is it healthy or sick? It's sick. Ask the big toe. It's not good. But it's intelligent. It's intelligent because it buys you time to survive on the iceberg. Why? There's only one reason your body will do that. There's only one reason your body will actually go into a state of eating itself and actually, a hierarchy of survival. It will let the big toe die in order to save the core and the brain. Why does your body do that? To buy you enough time to get off the iceberg. That's the only reason your body is ever going into that stress response. It's to buy you enough time to stop eating Big Macs. It's to buy you enough time to get off the couch. It's to buy you enough time to start looking in the mirror and telling yourself how great you are and how important you are and how you love yourself and love your kids. That's why your body goes into that state of stress, to buy you time to get your environment right, to get away from the tiger. And what's happened now is we've started to identify these states of stress and think that it's pathology and start feeding people drugs. It doesn't matter what drug you take on the iceberg, ladies and gentlemen. If you don't get off the iceberg, it's over. If your goal is to take a drug so that you don't pull blood away from your big toe, well, and that's how you do a randomized controlled trial, you can find a drug that'll stop you from being able to pull blood away from your big toe, and at the end of the day, your big toe is going to last longer, but you're going to last less long because you weren't able to survive. So unless you're going to change the environment, what you have to understand is that your state of physiology, your state of self-function is the genetic expression of your environment. Your state of health is the genetic expression of your past and present environments. So what stress does, let's think about it for a second. When we release stress hormones into our bodies, you know what happens? The first thing that happens is that we actually downregulate our insulin receptors. That's the receptors that take the blood sugar out of our bloodstream. So we actually downregulate that. Why? Well, because we don't want to be storing blood sugar if we're being chased by a tiger. We want to be utilizing that sugar for energy. Hands up if you'd like it for energy. Roger? Me too. The other thing that stress hormones do is they liberate fats into the bloodstream. They liberate more sugar. They work on the liver to release more glycogen and more sugar. They liberate more fats. They create more sticky factors and platelets so that your wound clotting, your blood gets thicker in case you get a wound. Why? Because what are the chances in fight or flight? At our ancestors, they've gotten fight or flight. They weren't just flipping someone the bird in traffic. If they got in fight or flight, it was because there was real danger most of the time. Yes or yes? Right. It wasn't just a constant emotional stress all the time. So our blood has to thicken in case we get a wound. That's very important. The other thing that happens is the stress hormones, especially cortisol, they're going to go work on your liver and they're going to downregulate the gene for the uptake of LDL cholesterol. You were told that's the bad cholesterol. That's absurd. Your body doesn't make any bad cholesterol or good cholesterol. It just makes appropriate cholesterol for your environment. So if you're going to downregulate the gene for the uptake of LDL cholesterol. The other thing you're going to do is you're going to downregulate the gene for the production of HDL or the good cholesterol. So what happens under constant stress is that you have a chronically changed cholesterol profile. Why? Because you need more LDL cholesterol because it's very important, one, in wound clotting, and number two, it's actually the base for the steroid hormones that you need to keep the stress hormones going. Your stress hormones are steroid fat-based. So it's very important. The other thing that stress does is it downregulates your immune system. So if you're ladies and gentlemen, how many of you are under constant stress? If we include, as Hans Selye taught us, that anytime you eat, move, or think in ways that aren't genetically congruent, that's a stressor. How many of you think are under chronic stress, have rocks in your backpack all the time? Everybody or everybody? Everybody. I know. I'm here to help you get the rocks out, not to make you feel better with the rocks in. That's the difference. You're welcome. I'm sure that was my mom who started that. Thanks, Mom. The other thing that cortisol does is it downregulates your immune system. Why does cortisol downregulate your immune system? Well, because your immune system is very metabolically expensive. Why are you tired when you have a cold or a flu? You're tired because you have to boost up your immune system, and that takes a lot of energy, a lot of glucose, and it's very tiring. So why would you want your immune system going if you're trying to get away from a tiger? You wouldn't. How many of you think you'd like to have your white blood cells determine whether, as your protective mechanism against a tiger attack? Me neither. So they're actually useless to you unless you survive the attack and are wounded, and then they'll kick in. The other thing that stress does is it downregulates your sense of, it increases your ability for signal detection at the expense of concentration. It literally changes how your brain works. Have you noticed people are stressed out? They're kind of twitchy, And what they're good at is what? What they're good at is looking all around, but they're not really good at focusing, are they? No, this is why when you phone your spouse in traffic, and they're busy honking and, doing this, and you say, these are the 10 things I want you to bring home. And they come home with 2, the first and the last on the list. And then they're under even more stress because they forgot the stuff. But when we're under stress, it's not a good time for learning. And so we literally look at kids with ADHD. There's all kinds of connections here. The other thing is that when we're stressed out chronically, we use up a hormone called serotonin. Serotonin is produced to get us back to balance and homeostasis after we've fired off the stress parts of the brain called the amygdala and the locus coeruleus. I don't think it matters, but it makes me sound smart, so I'm going to name them. And just in case we've got a couple neuroscientists in the room, I want to have some credibility. But the reality is that when you fire off your anxiety and your stress response in your body, well, the way to normally get back to that is two ways. One is motion. Fight or flight, movement, it fires off these movement pleasure pathways and allows us to get that serotonin, which is why chiropractic is so important. I mean, chiropractors don't even get this. Well, the two here tonight do, but many don't. And so the other thing is that as we use up all our serotonin to feel less anxious, we don't have any left over to feel good, and we start to get depressed and tired. The other thing that happens when we're stressed out all the time is we start to crave fat and sugar, and we gain weight from here to here, don't we? Why? Because fat and sugar are the basis of our stress hormones, and we need fat and sugar. Of course, in our ancestors, if they had fat and sugar, what did they have? They had fat from organic meat or nuts and seeds, and they had what? Sugar from fruit or vegetables. That was it. And then they moved and exercised all day. The other thing that happens at the liver is that we produce less what's called sex hormone binding globulin. If we're under stress and we are insulin resistant, because that's what happens, we get insulin resistant if we have stress all the time. Or if you eat a high carb diet, the high carb, low fat diet, yeah, that'll kill you. Obesity rates have gone up 500% in the last 10 years since we've really started advocating the high fat, low carb diet. There's not a hunter-gatherer population anywhere in the world that eats a high carb diet. And there's not a hunter-gatherer population anywhere in the world that has obesity or heart disease. When they studied over 2,000 Inuit in Greenland. Inuit have blubber for breakfast. They have a 10 o'clock blubber snack, followed by blubber lunch, a blubber afternoon snack, blubber dinner, and a before bed blubber snack. And they didn't find a single case of high blood pressure or atherosclerosis, heart problems. You have to ask yourself where the food pyramid came from. Was it based on a whole bunch of research, or was it based on grain and dairy lobbyists? You need to ask yourself that. I hope there's no dairy farmers in the room. God love you. I'll get to it. But let me just say this. Human beings are the only species on Earth that would drink the milk from another mammal. And human beings are the only species on Earth that would drink milk past infancy. And human beings are the only species on Earth with osteoporosis. You keep getting told to drink more milk, drink more milk. Do you know there's not a single study anywhere to show that drinking milk increases bone density? There's calcium in milk, but it doesn't increase bone density. And there are studies to show that if you eat more fruits and vegetables and liberate that calcium that you're supposed to get, that you will get better bone density. But the real thing is, how are you going to get better bone density if you don't exercise? That's like sitting around on your arse on the couch drinking protein and thinking you're going to get a big bicep. It's the dumbest thing in the world. Calcium is not a lack, or osteoporosis is not a lack of calcium issue. It's a lack of laying calcium down on your bone issue, and you can't do that if you're sedentary. There's so much mythology. Do you know how much osteoporosis costs? Just the fractures from osteoporosis. Just the fractures. None of the drugs, none of the treatments, nothing. Just the fractures cost $38 million a day in the United States. A day. If you gave me $38 million a day, and I just want it for half a year, I'm not greedy. You know what I would do? I would take that money, and I could actually house, feed, and have personal trainers, and I would actually save the system money. I could actually house, feed, and have personal trainers for everybody who was, and prevent more osteoporosis than they would get for $38 million a day. Sickness is the biggest industry on the planet. So if we think about what happens now, under stress, the other thing that happens is when you're insulin resistant, your liver produces less what's called sex hormone binding globulin. What do you think that does? Sex hormone binding globulin. What do you think that does? Bind sex hormones? Very good. Excellent. So what's important about binding sex hormones? Well, the important thing about binding sex hormones is that sex hormones are very mitogenic. What that means is that they produce a lot of cell division. Uncontrolled, really rapid cell division. What does that sound like? Right. So if you look at the research, what you'll see is that sex hormone binding globulin is a very good predictor of your chance of getting site-specific cancers. And the reason that is because the less sex hormone binding globulin you have, the more free sex hormone you have rushing around your bloodstream. So the more unbound sex hormone you have, the more it can go to areas where it's not supposed to go. If it's bound, it gets kind of transported like lead and taken to the place where it's supposed to go. Now, if you combine that with a down-regulated immune system, your chances of cancer under chronic stress are pretty high, aren't they? If you have chronic stress all the time, so you have a down-regulated immune system, that's tumor necrosis stuff, all that kind of, the immune system was supposed to find these cancer cells and kill them. And you have a lot of insulin, which is very mitogenic, a lot of sugar to feed these cells because you're eating a high-carb diet. And you've got low sex hormone binding globulin, what happens? Think about the women that went on hormone replacement therapy. What happened to the rates of breast cancer? They went up because they were adding free sex hormone in there and told them to go on the what? High-carb, low-fat diet. So they got insulin resistant, and then they had less sex hormone binding globulin being produced. Let's go back and look at chronic stress and say, well, if chronic stress means that we have, by the way, under chronic stress, what happens to your, when you're under stress, what happens to your heart rate? What happens to your blood pressure? Is that stupid or smart? It's smart. If you're getting chased by a tiger, do you need more heart rate and blood pressure? It's not a pathology. If you're under stress, you need that. You need to also circulate those energy substrates and the hormones themselves. It's not pathological. What's pathological is being in a stressful environment day in, day in, day in, day out. Staying on that iceberg is what's pathological. The body's response to it is not pathological, and having the strategy of trying to change the body's intelligent response to stress by adding drugs that stop the body from being able to express a state of physiology which allows greater survival isn't a great strategy. So let's think about it for a second. If we have increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, we have increased blood sugar, we have increased blood fats, we have a cholesterol profile change. How's that sounding for heart disease? Atherosclerosis, stroke. Pretty good. Very good. We have downregulated insulin receptors. We have high blood sugar all the time. We have increased cravings for fat and sugar. We have fatigue all the time because we don't have any serotonin or any of the other growth hormones being changed. I don't have time tonight. But how's that sounding for type 2 diabetes and obesity? Yeah, we're going to get there. If we just have enough time, we'll get there. And we already talked about sex hormone binding globulin and insulin, which is also mitogenic and decrease immunity. So we're looking pretty good for cancer too. We can talk about thyroid hormones, which get converted in the liver, which doesn't get converted the same if you're insulin resistant, because the liver is the first tissue that gets insulin resistant. There's nothing more deadly than sugar. There's nothing more deadly than pasta. Pasta is sugar. I don't care, a complex carb, right? Give me a break. Your ancestors, you don't know what to do with it. Your ancestors didn't have it. We didn't have grains. It cost more time and energy to try and collect a grain than it would to eat it. Why? Because it didn't grow in big fields like it does after the agricultural revolution. You didn't have dairy. You didn't chase a wildebeest around and suck on his teat. You had no dairy. Your body has no idea what to do with it. Genetically, we have not changed for thousands of years, but our lifestyle has changed tremendously. If you actually look at what's happened since the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, when we added all the grains to our diet, we added all these omega-6 fatty acids and took out all the omega-3 fatty acids, our brains have literally shrunk significantly. The human brain has shrunk significantly since the agricultural revolution. We now live in a feedlot. America and Canada and the Western nations are basically feedlots. They take a cow and make it obese in 6 weeks by feeding it grain and not letting it exercise. They make a cow obese in 6 weeks. They also can produce liver tumors. Up to 90% of those cows will get a liver tumor in 6 weeks. Check out the feedlots. The rule on the feedlot, of course, is that if the cow is not ambulatory, meaning it can't walk, they can't slaughter it. So you know what they do now? They lift them up on forklifts so they can stand, then they slaughter them. Did you see that a couple weeks ago in the news? They had to recall a couple million pounds of meat because they got caught doing that. These cows are so sick in these feedlots because they're eating grain. They don't know how to eat grain. They only know how to eat grass. So their stomachs, which are, they got 3 different stomachs, they get so much gas, they have to stuck tubes down their mouths so they can get the gas out of them because they can't do it. By the way, you get gassy when you eat grains too. Mostly men, apparently. These are really the 5 physiological pillars of chronic illness. And I want you to know it starts with the stress hormones. As soon as you eat, move, or think in a way that's stressful, that's not genetically congruent, that's a stressor, that's a rock in your backpack, and then you're going to get insulin resistance, you're going to get chronic inflammation, which is at the root of all kinds of chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, heart disease is very inflammatory. All these things are so related. Decreased sex hormone binding, decreased immunity. I want you to know, listen very carefully, and we're moving forward here quickly, I hope. I don't even know what time it is. I'm going to get kicked off here. But the reality is that the donut pushes you here. Unquestionably, unequivocally, the donut pushes you here. The apple pushes you away. That's the reality you need to take home tonight. That the donut pushes your kid here, and the apple pushes your kid away. That if you actually understand the truth, that it's no longer, it's absurd to stand up and say, oh, I wish I had better genes. It just doesn't make any sense. Not when we see the data. Humans are more genetically similar to each other than any other species. Apparently we're more genetically similar to each other than tomatoes are. We're so genetically similar that we can take somebody from Africa and mate them with someone from Scandinavia and get a beautiful baby. Understand? That we can take humans from anywhere around the world and we can successfully mate. And the reality is that once you understand how similar we are, then you start to, and you understand that it's the expression of our genes, not our gene code, that's making the difference, and it's the environment that determines the expression of our genes, then you're going to wake up to some more reality about those 5 pillars and the choices that you make. I would like to explain to you what your genes really do. If you could think of your genes as the recipe for life. Your genes are like the cookbook. So if you're double helix, which is just such an amazing structure, really. I mean, people say to me, how can you read every day? How can you get up every day and just read something more? Doesn't your brain get full? And I say, I'll tell you why. There's 2 things I have, and my daughter reinforces this for me all the time, is that as long as you have a sense of awe and wonder, you never get bored. As long as you have a sense of awe and wonder, and then if you add to that a sense of purpose, that if you understand that what you're reading can help save lives, maybe your own daughters or your kids or your families, then there's just never too much to read. I don't see any animal ever say, I'm done, I don't want to work tomorrow. I don't see animals saying, I'm just done, I just need to sit down for a couple days, I'm too tired, life's too hard. I just don't see any animal doing that except humans. And the reason we're doing that is not because we're tired, it's because we're stressed. It's not because we're tired, it's because we're stressed. We're tired because we're stressed. So if you can imagine the Empire State Building filled with books, every floor filled from top to bottom with books. And if that's our gene code, that really you and I would differ by a few pages only. Not per floor or per book, a few pages. And the reality is that those genes, those recipe books, they don't get to decide what goes to the kitchen to get baked up. In other words, the genes themselves have no autonomy over how they get expressed. The genes just sit there, and all they are is a book full of recipes for enzymes, for hormones, for states of physiology. They just sit there. And the gene doesn't get to decide when it gets turned on or when it gets turned off. The thing that determines when the gene gets turned on or turned off is the signal from the environment. No geneticist would argue. The thing that determines whether the gene gets turned on or turned off is the environment. It's the environment that determines how we're going to express our genes. And it's how we express our genes that's going to determine whether we're sick or well. But the genes don't get to determine it. It's not an inside-out phenomenon. The genes don't just say, okay, let's turn on sickness, let's turn on health. The genes simply respond to the environmental signal. I'm going to go through some research now, so bear with me, but this is going to drop you off your chairs a little bit. Our DNA, specifically the 25,000 genes identified in the Human Genome Project, is now widely regarded as the instruction book for the human body. That's right, it's the instruction book, it's the recipe books. But genes themselves need instructions for what to do and where and when to do it. These instructions are found not in the letters of the DNA itself, but on it, in an array of chemical markers and switches known collectively as the epigenome that lie along the length of that double helix, that thing Watson and Crick, that double helix. And the epigenome are the proteins that lie on top of that, and they're really the covers to the switches. The genes themselves don't change. The genes stay the same from birth to death. Anybody in this room think your genes change, your human gene code changes while you're alive? No, but can your health status change? In other words, can you go from a 10, and can you go down to a 9, to an 8, to a 7, to a 6, and actually come back up? Well, if your genes haven't changed and your health status can change, then we can't blame genes, because your gene code didn't change. These epigenetic switches and markers in turn help switch on or off the expression of particular genes. More and more researchers are finding that an extra bit of a vitamin, a brief exposure to a toxin, even an added dose of mothering, that's right, or fathering, of course, can tweak the epigenome and thereby alter the software of our genes in ways that affect an individual's body and brain for life. It gets better. You can mess up your grandkids. I'm serious. You will see that we are bioaccumulating in our species the effects of our toxic and deficient lifestyle. We are now producing the sickest generation of children in the history of the human species. We have more kids with obesity and diabetes and cancers and acne and ADHD and depression and anxiety than ever before in the history. I mean per capita, not gross numbers. We are producing the sickest generation of children our species has ever seen. Ever. The even greater surprise is the recent discovery that epigenetic signals from the environment can be passed on from one generation to the next, sometimes even several generations. What's eye-opening is a growing body of evidence suggesting that the epigenetic changes wrought by one's diet, behavior, or surroundings, that means your environment, ladies and gentlemen, can work their way into the germline and echo far into the future. Put simply, as bizarre as it may sound, this should not sound bizarre unless you had a faulty belief system, is that what you eat or smoke today could affect the health and behavior of your great-grandchildren. Typically, when agouti mice breed, let me explain what an agouti mouse is. An agouti mouse is named after this, dude named Agouti, and these mice are considered prized research mice because just like humans, they have a gene which causes them to get overweight and to get cancer and diabetes and die early. Let me say that again. The reason these mice are so prized in research is because all these people who are studying sickness say, great, we found a really sick mouse, and this mouse gets sick just like humans do because of its genes, so if we want to try out new drugs, these mice are great. Understand? Watch. When agouti mice breed, most of the offspring are identical to their parents, yellow, fat as pincushions, and susceptible to life-shortening disease. The parent mice in Journal and Waterland's experiment, however, produced a majority of offspring that looked altogether different. These young mice were slender and mostly brown. Ladies and gentlemen, that's one generation. Moreover, listen, please listen. They did not display their parents' susceptibility to cancer and diabetes, and they lived to a spry old age. The effects of the agouti gene had been virtually erased. What did they do? Something so radical, you will not believe it. They changed the diet of the mouse. They changed the diet of the mother. What's really significant about this is that they had these mice in captivity eating a disgusting diet, not exercising, and they considered them that their problems were caused by the gene, not the fact that they were in a cage eating disgusting food. And they studied these mice for generation after generation after generation. They kept producing what? Offspring that would be fat and yellow and die early. Some crazy quack came along and said, well, why don't we change the diet of the mom's mice to a more genetically congruent diet for mice and see what happens? They didn't even get them exercising. They just changed the diet. Look at the result. And yet we had the best, smartest researchers on the planet studying those mice, convinced that it was a gene that was causing the problem. This has rocked the foundation of people with that belief system. All of these discoveries are shaking the modern biological and social certainties about genetics and identity. Gene as fate had become conventional wisdom. Through the study of epigenetics, that notion at last may prove outdated. Suddenly, for better or worse, we appear to have a measure of control over our genetic legacy. Before, it was believed that genes predetermined outcomes. Now everything we do, everything we eat or smoke can affect our gene expression and that of future generations. Epigenetics introduces the concept of free will. No, it introduces the concept of responsibility into the idea of genetics. This is from the World Health Organization. Affluent populations habitually consume a diet that was unknown to the human species a mere 10 generations ago. Compared with the diet that fueled human evolution, the so-called affluent diet of today has twice the amount of fat, bad fat, not the good fat from animals that are not fed corn but are fed grass, though that's good fat. A much higher ratio of saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. We're losing our omega-3s because we're eating so many grains. A third of the former daily fiber intake. Our ancestors only got fiber from fruits or vegetables, never grains. Fruits and vegetables have water-soluble fiber that feeds your natural probiotics, the healthy bacteria in your gut that make up about 70 to 80% of your immune system. Grain fibers do not, despite what the Cheerio ads say. And a reduced intake of micronutrients, meaning vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, antioxidants, that kind of thing. Listen carefully, please. Worldwide, the adoption of this diet, the Whitey diet, has been accompanied by a major increase in heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, and other chronic diseases. Well, wait a minute. How can we be blaming genes if when people start to eat like us, they get sick? How can we blame genes? Best journal in the world, Journal of Applied Physiology. Currently, modern chronic diseases, including cardiovascular diseases, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and cancer, are the leading killers of westernized society and are increasing rampantly in developing nations. How can they be increasing rampantly in developing nations if it's genetic? Are there rampant genetic mutations occurring in developing nations? Or rampant changes in their lifestyle choices? Which is it? Right. They're spending $1 billion right now or more trying to find the obesity gene. It's unbelievable. Because there's a huge market in telling you have no control or power. There's a huge market telling you have no hope, that you have to rely on somebody else to sell you something to get well. It's sickening to me. Clearly, however, there is a solution to this epidemic of metabolic disease that is inundating today's society worldwide: exercise and diet. And of course, I add healthy emotions. Overwhelming evidence from a variety of sources, including epidemiological, prospective cohort, and intervention studies, links most chronic diseases seen in the world today to physical inactivity and inappropriate diet consumption. From a genetic standpoint, humans living today are Stone Age hunter-gatherers displaced through time to a world that differs from that for which our genetic constitution was selected. Unlike evolutionary maladaptation, our current discordance between how we live and what our genes need has little effect on reproductive success. In other words, even if you eat like a suicidal maniac and move like or don't move like a suicidal maniac and think like a suicidal maniac, the bottom line is you're probably still going to live long enough to reproduce, because chronic illnesses take time to bioaccumulate. Rather, it acts as a potent promoter of chronic illnesses: atherosclerosis, hypertension, cancer, diabetes, obesity, among others. These diseases are the result of interaction between a genetically controlled biochemical processes, your genetic expression, and a myriad of biocultural influences, lifestyle factors that include nutrition, exercise, and exposure to noxious substances. Although our genes have hardly changed, our culture has been transformed almost beyond recognition during the past 10,000 years, especially since the Industrial Revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, especially since the Chemical Revolution, which was after World War II. After World War II, we changed from putting manure on our fields to fertilize them to putting on products derived from oil. NPK, the fertilizers they put to grow in your food, come from petroleum. That's true. The chemicals and pesticides were used in the war as poison gases for the enemy. They developed from those the pesticides and herbicides to put on your fruits and vegetables. If you look at our health status since the 1950s, it's been an incredible, incredible difference. Incredible difference. And I can't believe we have the audacity to blame our genes. There is increasing evidence that the resulting mismatch between what our genes expect, wild humans living outside captivity, what we expect genetically, versus what we're delivering. And that mismatch fosters diseases of civilization, meaning lifestyle illnesses, that together cause 75% of deaths in Western nations, but that are rare among persons whose life ways reflect those of our ancestors. 75% of deaths are preventable. They're caused by suicide by lifestyle. That's a fact. That the vast majority of the money we spend on sickness care, which they call health care, which is absurd, it's sickness care. The vast majority of the money we spend, the vast majority of the people who are filling the hospitals, the vast majority of the people who are dying from suicide from lifestyle choice. And no one's standing up and telling them. The ads on television aren't saying that. They're not hearing that from their practitioners. There is now unequivocal evidence in the literature supporting the notion that all environmental factors combined, including physical inactivity, defined here as less than 30 minutes of brisk walking a day. By the way, if your ancestors exercised by walking 30 minutes or more a day, and that was it, guess what? I hear people, how many of you think I could drop you into a hunter-gatherer society and you'd be good to go? No, you'd be dead. Well, they'd kill you because you'd be such a pain in the arse dragging you around. I used to think they'd probably kill you and eat you, but they don't eat junk food, so they'd probably kill you and burn you. Or use you for a bear trap or something, I don't know. I always worry about when I'm in a plane, I think, well, if this plane goes down, who am I going to eat? I look for the healthy person, you know what I mean? Okay, aisle 5, you're going... Indeed, environmental factors have been identified as 58 to 91% of causal factors for 3 of the most dominant chronic health conditions afflicting individuals in modern-day America. And that's all over the world, by the way. Diabetes, heart disease, and site-specific cancers. There is a dramatic shift in the preponderance or the commonness of these conditions that they were once very rare. Well, it can't be because our genes are changing, because they're not changing. A Scandinavian twin study. Now, let me tell you that as a researcher, I've been trying to participate in a study on Scandinavian twins for years. I have sent my CV. I have offered to fly myself over. Anyway, I said my preference would be the volleyball team. So far, no takers. Anyway, a Scandinavian twin study showed that, see, this introduced everybody can get interested in research, showed that 58 to 100% of site-specific cancers had an environmental origin. In fact, if you look at cancer research, they'll say that cancers have an initiator and a promoter. An initiator and a promoter. Both of those things are environmental. A total of 91% of the cases of type 2 diabetes and 82% of the coronary artery cases and 84,000 female nurses could be attributed to habits of so-called high-risk behavior, defined as being a little bit overweight, a diet low in fiber and low in omega-3 fats, and high in trans fat, which is deadly, that margarine. You know the margarine they told you to eat? Don't eat butter, eat margarine. You know, the experts told you that for years. Now they're saying, oh, by the way, we killed you. Don't do that. That's the problem when you have evidence and expertise that's not based on good scientific data. It's based on common knowledge. And glycemic load, a sedentary lifestyle, and currently smoking. 84,000 nurses, you could prevent 91% of the cases of diabetes and 84% of the heart disease. Say, wow, what drug can do that? This year alone in the United States, 1 million people will die of heart disease. Is that because they forgot to take their pills? No, they will take their pills, more pills than ever before in history, and they will die. The majority of deaths from chronic health conditions in the United States are of environmental origin, not genetic. Our genes are programmed for health. It is toxicity and deficiency affecting gene expression that leads to sickness, not faulty genes. Our genes do not differ from our ancestors. Our ancestors and surviving tribes that live like our ancestors don't get the chronic illnesses like we get, even the elderly. The only difference between our healthy ancestors and our sick society is toxicity and deficiency of environment. The genes have not changed. Modern illnesses due to environmental, not genetic factors, chronic illness I'm talking about. Modern illnesses are avoidable. Modern health is attainable. Aging process. Well, let me tell you quickly about aging. Aging is not about, you don't get born with a certain number of cells and you keep those cells for 120 years. You get born and your cells turn over and divide all the time. We're clear on that? So really what determines your rate of aging is the rate of cell division. Because really what happens is, here's what happens. You get born with 2 half cells. That's what happens. They come together, they form the zygote, and then those cells start to divide. But what happens is that DNA, that from the 2 half cells, you know, half the DNA from mom, half the DNA from dad, and that comes together to form all of your genetic code in that double helix in that cell. And every time that cell divides, you have to photocopy the DNA. It's called transcription. But the photocopy is never as good as the original, is it? It might be such a slight difference that it's barely detectable. But every time your cells divide, so you have the original, and then your cells divide, then you have a photocopy. Then you photocopy the photocopy. Then you photocopy the photocopy, the photocopy. Get me? Say stop, please. Thank you. And so what happens is, after 120 years, the quality of that photocopy is so poor that you can't read the recipes for life very well, and you know, you got kidney failure or something that happens. You die of old age. Get me? So anything in your life that speeds up the rate of cell division also speeds up the rate of aging. Stress does what? Increases the rate of cell division and increases the rate of aging. Anytime you eat, move, or think in ways that are toxic and deficient, you increase your rate of aging. And remember, with the rock in the backpack, you also increase the struggle of day-to-day life. You have more of a metabolic cost. And there's lots of other interesting things. I want you to know that it's ridiculous to blame illnesses on aging. There's only one thing that aging causes, and that's aging. There is some degeneration with aging, of course, but most of the sicknesses that we thought were due to aging aren't due to aging at all. They're due to a bioaccumulation. Think of the orcas in the sound here, Puget Sound and in the Juana-Fuca Strait. Now, we know that as they get older, what do? They bioaccumulate more and more toxins, don't they? So when they get sick when they're old, should we say it's because of old age or because they bioaccumulated horrible toxins? Exactly. Think of 2 ponds that you dig in your backyard at the same time. One of those ponds you put in clean water and nice fish and some plants, and then the other one you dump in beer and pizza and all the other crap. Now, after 5 years, you might not notice a difference in those ponds, but after 10 years, would you notice a difference? Would one be sicker than the other? Should you blame the age? No, because they're the same age. So we have to understand that most of the things the illnesses that we attribute to aging aren't due to aging at all. Aging is wonderful. I hate the concept of anti-aging. It's insulting. I like anti-premature aging. Now that makes sense to me. But the truth is, aging is a wonderful, beautiful part of life. And it's only in this ridiculous culture that we don't honor it. And that's because our elderly are very sick a lot of the time. But our elderly are very sick because of the way that they've lived in the years prior to becoming elderly. But if you look at the culture right here, and the natives that lived right here, the elderly, what did they look like? Were they laying around overweight with tubes hanging out of them? Were they a burden to have around the teepee or the longhouse, or were they an asset? They were an asset. You know what their greatest asset was? First of all, they stayed well, but their greatest asset was they helped raise the children, and they passed on the most significant information that we can pass on from generation to generation. You know what that information is? How to eat, move, and think. And we can talk all we want about, oh, society's changing, we got computers, and when my grandmother was born, you know, she was in a horse and buggy, and now we're going to the moon. So there's no relevance. That's garbage. You know what's relevant? How to eat, move, and think, and how to love one another, and how to have a family, raise a child. That is timeless. And we've been told to butt out of our health to the point now where we can't pass on the wisdom of how to eat, move, and think to our children because we haven't paid any attention to it. Most people pay more attention about which car they will buy than what they put into their children's mouths. So why do we get sick, ladies and gentlemen? How many of you think it's because of bad genes? Bad germs or bad luck? Are we pretty good on bad choices? Okay, good. So now what we have to do is figure out how to make some good choices. Science is based on the encouragement of logic and independent thinking, questioning, and critique. Dogma is based on the encouragement of blind faith and acceptance of group or cult leaders without questioning or critiquing. Your health and the health of your loved ones is too important to allow dogma to guide your decisions. Moral, ethical healthcare systems and providers are scientific, not dogmatic. As soon as you hear someone tell you they know and they don't want to learn anything else, run. Run. None of us know. I can put a great body of evidence together for you, and I'm very confident about what I'm sharing with you is correct. But as soon as I stop wanting to learn or think that if someone thinks differently than me that they must be wrong or don't belong to my club or have the same initials after their name, that's absurd. It's dangerous. If we are sick because of bad choices, how can we get and stay well? Drugs and surgery to treat disease or lifestyle intervention to promote health and prevent illness? What makes more sense to you? If your mind and body are in your house, then which expert should you choose to restore and maintain the health of your house? The fire department or the repair and maintenance department? If your body is your house and your house is on fire, who should you call? The fire department. And when the fire department arrives, what will they do? Well, they'll come out with the two tools that they have, axes and fire hoses, drugs and surgery. And so they'll get out their axe and they'll smash out your windows, they'll smash down your door, they'll smash into the walls of your house, and then they'll bring in their fire hose and they'll spray all your cherished belongings and soak everything down. And if they get there on time and don't make any mistakes and you called them on time, is it possible they could save the life of your house? Absolutely. And should you be grateful? Yeah. Eternally. Of course. My question to you is this. What's left when they leave? A mess. Now, would you think it intelligent to call the fire department back the next day to get your house back to working order? Would you think that the same tools that are used in a fire and an emergency to stop your house from dying would be the same rational tools that you would use to restore your house to homeostasis and balance? Or would you need someone with a totally different set of expertise? Would you need the general contractor? You'd need someone who knew how to do what? Knew what your house needed in order for it to get back to well-being. The problem in our society is that the fire department's got all the pull and all the money and all the influence. And what they say is if you can't put out a fire, you're no good. If you can't make the plant stop wilting, water's no good. You're useless. You have to show us that you can put out fires. And as a wellness doctor, I would say, well, that's absurd because I don't want to put out fires and I honor and respect your ability to do that. But what I'm telling you is that putting out fires, axes and fire hoses can't restore the house to working order. And they say, do you know how impotent you look with your tool belt and your paintbrush when we've got a fire to put out? Do you know how serious that is? And I say, yes, I do. But do you know how impotent you look when we're trying to clean the house and do a barn raising or whatever else it is, and all you've got is an axe and a fire hose? If all you've got is a drug and surgery, how can you tell me you're about healthcare and wellness and prevention? What is it about that that's going to help people get well and get back to balance? Because I'm very willing to openly admit that if you have an emergency, you should bypass a wellness office and go directly to where? The fire department. It makes perfect sense. But if you think you're going to use that same department to get you back to working order, let's just think about what happens in a hospital for a second. How many of you think that you could develop a better diet that's in the hospital? I mean, we got people with tubes and everything else, and we've got 7 people making sure they get the right pill, and then they serve them a pork chop with powdered gravy and Jell-O. Because there's no connection between how these people are eating and them recovering. Because the focus is not on them restoring function. The focus is on what? The sickness. And I understand it and empathize with it because it's an emergency. But my point is that, I went to see a friend of mine who was diagnosed with cancer. And I haven't been in a hospital for a long time. And the first thing I saw when I went to the hospital was, thank you for the $7 million or whatever it was that the community just did. I mean, there's just an endless supply of money to this stuff. And I thought, wow, $7 million, or whatever it was, 17. And then I came around the corner, and I swear this is true. I'd be struck dead if it's not. There was a person in a wheelchair with a urine bag on the side of it, with a Tim Hortons coffee and a donut in the hospital. And I thought to myself, how can we have a Tim Hortons in a hospital and call that sane? Because we're so removed from the concept of restoring health and what's required to do that, and so focused on illness and disease in the fire department and fires, that everything's about fear now. Do you know how many fires there are? It's about cancer and diabetes. All you hear is fear, 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 fear. No one's ever saying, well, wait a minute, how do we prevent that? And the argument I say is, well, houses don't spontaneously combust and start fire. And they say, yes, they do, it's genetic. Chronic illness rates are rising rapidly. Since 1980, there's been a rapid increase in the per-person rate of chronic illness in the United States, and by the way, every industrial society. This increase has been mirrored throughout the industrial world and is increasing even more rapidly in developing nations. Let's look at the per capita chronic illness rates in the United States since 1980. Over 46% of the United States population, that is mirrored exactly in Canada, by the way, currently has a chronic illness. This accounts for 78% of all healthcare spending. The number of prescriptions per person is doubling every decade. The number of prescriptions per person is doubling every decade. 76% of Americans regularly take prescription drugs. Americans consume 25 million pills per hour every day. Let's look at the per capita drug use. That means per person drug use since 1980. Skyrocketing. So, what do we know? We know that illness rates are going up, and so is drug use. So is drug use preventing any of the illness rates going up? The cost of sickness is also increasing exponentially. Between 1960 and 2002, spending on prescription drugs alone increased by 55 times. 55 times. That's not a bad return. Health has declined during the same period. There's the per capita cost of sickness in the United States. In 2002, spending reached $3.5 billion per day. Per day on sickness. This figure will be over $7 billion per day within 5 years. Is it out of control? Heart disease, $501 million. Cancer, $430 million. Digestive disorders, $337 million. I love digestive disorders. I think of this and I think, you've got a commercial where a guy goes in and bellies up to the diner, orders a chili dog, French fries, a Coke, and a beer, and his body rejects that poison so violently he can't eat it. The solution? To take a Tums before you go into the diner so you can commit suicide comfortably. That is a legal advertisement. That's a legal advertisement. I find that to be a human tragedy. I can't find humor in that. I mean, it's shocking humor, but I find it. You know, the more you learn about this, sometimes I'm in the supermarket and I see what people put in the buggies for their children, and my knees buckle. I mean, I really find it so sad for me to look at those children and see them already overweight with acne and not paying attention probably, and full of sugar and dyes and chemicals. And I think to myself, the marketing is so successful that those parents think they're depriving their child of something if they don't feed it that poison. That's how successful it is. If we send our children to school overweight, whose fault is that, our children's or ours? How can we possibly say they won't eat anything else? They've just outsmarted you and said, you know what, my addiction is so strong, just like if they're on cocaine when they're a teenager, and they say, I'm not going to bed without my cocaine, and you say, okay, take your cocaine. If they say, I'm not eating anything unless it's junk food, and you give it to them, you have not helped them. That's not being more loving. It is not being more loving. You're marketed to believe it's more loving. It's poisoning your child and yourself. And you're far too important, and so are your children, for me to allow you to poison yourselves without getting in your face about it. Obesity, $320,000. Diabetes, $273,000. Oh, I am million, sorry. Million. Thank you. Osteoporosis, $38 million. That's fractures only per day. Per day. There's no way we can keep up, is there? And I want you to know that all of this money being spent, there's not a penny of it that's going to stop us from spending it. that there's nothing in that system that's going to stop people from having osteoporosis. There's nothing in drugs and surgery that's going to stop people from having heart disease or cancer or digestive disorders or obesity or diabetes or arthritis. When you take those pills, you don't go away after 2 weeks and say, ah, good, I'm done, I'm cured. You keep taking them, you're a customer for life. These figures are consistent across virtually all industrial nations, including Canada, Australia, and Great Britain. I throw up the stats for those places when I'm there. In British Columbia, the healthiest spot in the world, we think. 42% of all government spending goes towards sickness. I love people in British Columbia when they say, well, we have free health care. Are you kidding me? Do you think the doctors work for free? Do the nurses work for free? They shouldn't, by the way. That'd be sick. But do they? Are the hospital buildings for free? Do the construction companies build the hospitals for free? Do they give out the drugs for free? Does all the equipment free? Then how can we think it's free? It's not free. It's subversive. It's your tax dollar. Basically 50 cents of it. 50 cents of every tax dollar you pay goes to sickness. And then they tell you it's free, so you don't freak out about it. It's not free. If it was free, everybody who worked in that system would be doing it for free. This figure is projected to grow to 70% by 2017. That's 9 years. 34% of all British Columbians have a chronic illness. This consumes 80% of all the sickness treatment spending. British Columbia spends $1.5 million on sickness. $1.5 million per hour. You can actually go to this website, bcbudget.gov.bc.ca, and there's a little thing in the corner that tells you how much it's spent while you're on the website. Well, it goes $1.5 million per hour. You can sort of figure it out. There has been absolutely no change in our genes during this period of exponential increase in chronic illness, prescription rates, and spending. There's been no change in our genes. Watch. There's our gene change since 8000 BC. 0. It is statistically and scientifically absurd to blame the increases in chronic illness rates on genes. Watch. If chronic illness rates are doing this, how can we attribute this to this and call ourselves rational? We can't, can we? There's been exponential unhealthy changes in our lifestyle during this period of exponential increase in chronic illness, prescription rates, and spending. I can tell you that as our chronic illness rates have done this, I can show you the changes in our diet, which I showed you from the World Health Organization. Our energy expenditure and exercise levels have gone down by 65% since after World War II. And our emotional stress on a daily level has skyrocketed. Skyrocketed. The increases in chronic illness are directly attributable to the documented unhealthy changes in our lifestyle, particularly in the areas of pollutants, nutrition, exercise, and emotional stress. Here's the unhealthy human lifestyle change. It tracks exactly, basically, with our chronic illness rates. And again, where's the gene change? And we still have people saying it's bad luck, bad germs, or bad genes. It is scientifically and statistically absurd not to attribute the increases in chronic illness to unhealthy lifestyle change. If the current trends continue, I want you to know that within a few short years, our children, watch. How many of you saw An Inconvenient Truth? I want you to know that unlike Al Gore, I don't believe it's moving well to use an electronic lift. I believe that you have to use exercise and get up. So in 2020, if just the current trends continue, our kids, by the time they're 13 years old, a vast majority of them will be obese, not 50% like now, but a vast majority will be obese. They will have type 2 diabetes. They will already be developing heart disease and cancer. They will weigh over 200 pounds. They will watch television for 25 hours a day. That's what the stats say. I don't know how they're going to do it, but they'll figure it out. That's by 2020 if the current trends continue. Obesity rates have increased 152% since 1960, and now almost 70% of Americans are overweight or obese. 70% of Australians consider themselves sedentary. 24% of Americans have no daily activity. None. We're not much better, by the way. The global burden of cancer continues to increase. In the year 2000, 5.3 million men and 4.7 million women developed a malignant tumor, and 6.2 million died from the disease. The number of new cases is expected to grow by 50% over the next 20 years to reach 15 million. Well, our genes aren't changing in the next 50 years, and it's not because we're aging. The most rapid increases in cancer rates are occurring in developing nations that are adopting the industrial lifestyle and among middle-aged and young. In 1973, 115 per 100,000 California women were diagnosed with invasive breast cancer. By 1999, only 26 years later, the number had risen by over 20%. Per capita, ladies and gentlemen, per capita. In 1973, there were only about 6 cases of in situ breast cancer diagnosed per 100,000 California women. 26 years later, the number had risen by over 500%. Did the genes change in that time? Every year for the past 50 years, we spent more money per person on drugs and surgery to treat chronic disease. Is that true? Yes. Absolutely. Fact, every year for the past 50 years, chronic illness rates have risen. Is that true? Yes. Fact, every year for the past 50 years, the number of deaths from chronic illness has risen. Yes. Fact, in the last 20 years, we have seen pandemic increases in chronic illness in both middle-aged adults and children. The increased illness rates cannot be attributed to aging. Myth, chronic illness is genetic and thus not preventable or curable, and therefore the only solution is to treat chronic illness with drugs and surgery. Fact, we are marketed, lobbied, and coerced to demand more drugs and surgery in hopes of cures. What is the main issue every year there's an election? We need more what? Money for more drugs and surgery. The fact is, our genes have not changed during this time of rapid increase in chronic illness. Our lifestyle, how we eat, move, and think, has changed dramatically since industrialization, and especially over the last 50 years, and enormously over the past 20. Increases in chronic illness rates are directly attributable to lifestyle. Increases in chronic illness have no association to genetic change. Offering drugs and surgery as the solution for chronic illness prevention or cure is illogical, unscientific, and hopeless. The only hope, the only scientific evidence, and the only logic with respect to a solution lies in lifestyle change. And by the way, that means it lies in your hands, no one else. It's time for a change. What we need to do is we need to stop asking sickness experts for information on wellness and health. We have to start to developing some wellness experts. You know, you can't even go to school to become a wellness expert. I had to start my own I teach a postgraduate program for doctors, and I had to write the books. I had to do everything. Because there is no place you can go and learn and get credential to teach people how to eat, move, and think. It's not considered important. Let's think about this for a second. Are we sick because of how we eat, move, and think? Yeah? Watch. What drug or surgery, what part of the rainforest are we going to be able to grind up? What shark fin will we be able to grind up? Where is this miracle drug going to come from that's going to solve a problem created by not eating proper foods? Which drug is going to solve problems created by not feeding ourselves or our children proper nutrition? Where's the hope in that? What drug is ever going to solve a problem created by being sedentary? Is there a pill out there that we're ever going to find at any time, regardless of how much money we spend on it? Is there any pill out there that's going to solve a problem created by not exercising? Is there any pill out there that's going to solve a problem by not teaching our children how to love themselves and deal with adversity? And that they're respected and honored? And that we respect and honor ourselves, and that we're part of a community, and that we feel important and we contribute to the economy? Is there any drug that's going to fix those issues? No chance. How we avoid all the illnesses and suffering that results from living a lifestyle that's deficient and toxic? Well, it's pretty easy. We eat, move, and think well. Watch this. This is now, remember the consequences of the donut and the apple? Here's where we go. People who do not eat fresh fruit every day have a 32% greater chance of a fatal stroke and 24% greater chance of fatal heart attack. Swedish researchers found that people who ate an apple a day had 60% less risk of kidney cancer than non-apple eaters. Animals fed cruciferous vegetables had a 90% reduction in cancer rate after exposure to aflatoxin. Aflatoxin, by the way, is the fungus found on peanuts. Do not eat peanuts. They're not a nut anyway. They're a legume. Don't touch them. 90% decrease. Watch this. 2 groups. Both groups get this aflatoxin. The one group gets vegetables, and they have a 90% reduction in cancer compared to the other group. Say wow. Thank you. A review of 170 studies from 17 nations revealed that people who eat the most fruits and vegetables consistently have half the cancer rates of those who eat the least. More than a 20% reduction in in risk of colorectal cancer from the addition of 1 daily serving of vegetables. Men who ate fresh fruit every day had 70% less chance of dying from cancer of the digestive tract than those who ate almost no fruit. Proven benefits of moving well. By the way, most of this comes from studies looking at walking 30 minutes 5 times a week. How much does that cost? Right. You don't have to buy it from me. You can just go out and do it on your own. Prevent up to 91% of cases of obesity and type 2 diabetes. That's the $519 million a day combined. Prevent up to 50% of all cases of heart disease. Reduce risk of stroke by 25 to 30%. Prevent up to 50% of all stroke deaths. Reduce congestive heart disease deaths by 63%. Reduce hospital readmission for heart failure patients by 70% or 71%. Normalize blood pressure. Reduce risk of developing high blood pressure. Restore and maintain heart and blood vessel health. Restore and maintain normal cholesterol and triglyceride levels. Keeps going. Reduce risk of breast cancer by up to 60%. Reduce pancreatic cancer in overweight people by 50%. Reduce lung cancer even in smokers by 72%. Reduce melanoma, that's right, skin cancer from the sun, by 72%. Prevent up to 50% of colon cancer. Reduce risk and improve rheumatoid and osteoarthritis. Prevent osteoporosis. Increase new bone formation. Increase strength, flexibility, balance. Decrease gallbladder removal by 20%. Decrease gallstones. Improve digestion and decrease indigestion. Improve bowel function. We're not done. How much does that cost? What drug can compete with these stats? Increase immune system function. Increase macrophage anti-tumor activity and antioxidant levels. Decrease all-cause mortality, all death, decrease all death by 67% in the general population. Decrease all-cause mortality by 50% in 61 to 81-year-olds by walking. Prevent up to 47% of cognitive impairment. Prevent up to 62% of Alzheimer's and 52% of dementia from walking. That's the movement learning pathways, the movement brain stimulation pathways that chiropractors are so good at, by the way. They are, because those pathways are basically from movement of your spine. It's not all from movement of the blood. A lot of it's from movement of the spine. Most of the receptors to feed your brain, the movement learning and movement pleasure pathways, come from movement of your spine. And if your spine's not moving properly, you can't feed your brain those nutrients. I lecture all over the world about that, and there's all kinds of great research on it. Better physical function in older adults. Decreased chance of ever being in a nursing home. Decreased rate of aging. Enhanced learning by 12 times. Increased serotonin levels, everybody wants that. Decreased depression by 20%, including relapses. Increased growth and healing hormones. Decreased stress and body breakdown hormones. Decreased risk of weight gain. Now let's look at the benefits of thinking well, having a positive attitude, loving yourself and others. Decreased risk of developing and increased chance of recovering from depression, anxiety, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, obesity, cancer, arthritis, infertility, hypertension, asthma, autoimmune disorders, peptic ulcers, chronic pain. Okay, let's start. We've got to end. I know you don't want to go. But the truth is, I've got to leave you now with something that you can take home tomorrow and have a different life. Yes? Right. So the first rule is this. Never start a program of moving towards well-being by taking things away from you. Never start by saying, I'm going to give up coffee, I'm going to give up chocolate, I'm going to give up pizza, I'm going to give up beer, I'm going to give up wine. We never go towards health by starting to take things away. That's deprivation. It's uncomfortable. It's a rock in your backpack. It will not work. The way we move, the secret to success is to add positive things to your life. Are you ready? Watch this. The first thing I want you to do is fresh fiber first. That rule is this, is that before you have every meal, I don't care if that's a meal of donuts, but before you have every meal, you're going to have some kind of raw fruit or vegetable. What if you say, I only like grapes? What should you do? Have grapes every time. I do not care. How many people in this room just couldn't be comfortable with eating something raw before every meal? I'm not asking you to change the meal. I'm just asking you to add some fresh fiber first. How many of you can do it? Everybody? Imagine if you did that. Imagine between now and a year from now, the only change you made was you added fresh, raw fruit or vegetable before every meal. Would you be healthier in a year? It wouldn't cost you any extra. Probably cost you less. The other crap you'd eat probably costs more. Incorporate activity into your work, family, and social lives. A lot of people, one of the great questions I get, I remember I had a very good interview I did in Manhattan, and the guy said, well, listen, Dr. Chestnut, what the listeners really want to know is, what about the kids? And I said, well, listen, here's what you need to know about your kids. You can't tell your kids not to do what you are doing, and you can't tell your kids to do what you're not doing. The greatest gift you'll ever give to your children is to role model. That's it. You got to do it. And the other thing is you got to beat the heck out of them every day. You got to beat the living heck out of them. My daughter and I, we have our wrestling time. We call it whoopings. I don't know what they think at school when she goes and says, my dad gave me a whooping, but we have whooping time, and there's rules. I'll tell you, if you ever have a match with my daughter, you better watch your eyes and throat, because that's what I teach her, eyes and throat. Eyes and throat. Go first. So you got to go in like this, But we go in and we wrestle every day. Because kids don't want to exercise, they want to play. Isn't that true? Yeah. And can you think of anything more bonding and more fantastic than to wrestle with your kids every day? It's so wonderful. And I can call a 20-second timeout. That's my rule. Anytime I call a 20-second timeout, she goes like this and she counts to 20 as fast as she can. And I have to get as many kisses in as I can in 20 seconds. So if I call a 20-second timeout, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She's getting really good at counting now, so I'm getting better at kissing. But you know how exhausting that is for kids? Imagine wrestling someone 500 pounds, right? That's grabbing you, whipping you around, and giving you elbows. And that's what I do with my daughter every day, and she's totally exhausted by it. And it was great bonding, and what kid doesn't want to wrestle? They all want to wrestle. So what you have to start doing is having activities that are having events that involve activity with you and your family. If you're going to meet for coffee, which is what? death, and then you walk into the coffee shop, which is the carbohydrate delivery system. And you know what? Great, enjoy it. But the fact is, why don't you meet 5 minutes away and then walk to the coffee shop and enjoy that, and then walk 5 minutes back? It's easy. There are so many things that we do that we socially around things instead of activity. But it's always more fun to go for a walk with somebody else. That's why it's so important that's why I think joining a gym is a great idea, because you're doing things with other people there. And if you show up and you don't show up, they say, hey, where were you yesterday? It makes sense to form a group, but our social events are always around something that's usually not good for us instead of focused around something that is good for us. The other thing is always shop full. No matter what. If you go to the supermarket and you're not full, pig out on anything. I don't mean go into the bulk candy and start feeding your face like I see some people do. You got to go pay for it first. But the reality is you'd be better off to eat something, even if it's not great, to fill yourself up before you shop. Because what do we know if you shop hungry? You're putting garbage in there. I want you to know the battle is not won or lost at home. The battle is always won or lost at the point of purchase. Here's what I know about you. When you're at home and it's about 8 o'clock at night, and it's bonbon time, and you're sitting in front of the idiot box, and you say to yourself, maybe just a little something. And if you go to the cupboard and it's not there, what will you do? You won't get in the car. Most of you will do what? You will search for an hour. All your secret spots, high and low, you'll be exhausted. By the end of that search, you'll stagger into bed and fall asleep. And you'll wake up in the morning and go, well, I guess I didn't really need it. If it's not in the house, you won't consume it, because a few of you, this person's very dedicated, she'll get in the car. But you should phone her. But very few people will get out of the house to go get it. Is that true? Don't bring it home. If your kids say, I hear this argument, well, my kids are going to get it out anyway. I don't care. Don't bring it in. That's not a good reason to bring it home, is it? No. If you don't bring it in your house, you won't eat it. And at the end of the day, no matter how bad that craving is, in the morning you'll be just fine. And the other thing is judge your meal or whatever choice you're going to do by how you'll feel after, not before or during. How many of you have ever regretted a salad? Oh, why did I eat that lettuce? It doesn't happen. But how many of you have regretted something else? Right? So you get that 3 minutes of pleasure while you're scarfing it back, and then you get what? 23 hours and 57 minutes of guilt. And so if you would just assess how you're going to feel after you eat it and bring that to your conscious level before you do it, you're going to change some of those things. But the reality is that's not how we start, because how we're going to start is we're going to add some positive things. I will tell you that here's some things that you really need to have, for sure. You need to have some fish oil. You need to supplement with an essential omega-3 essential fatty acid. If you don't know what that is, ask one of the docs. The next thing is you need to take a probiotic. What that probiotic is, it's healthy bacteria. We now consume 1/millionth of the healthy bacteria per day that our ancestors did. Plus, we kill them with antibiotics, alcohol, and sugar. You need to have a probiotic. The last thing is you have to have some kind of supplement for multivitamin, mineral, antioxidants. The best thing you'll ever do for that, no matter what anyone tells you, the best thing that you'll ever do for that is to buy a juicer. And then go to Lifestyles and buy yourself the organic produce and juice it. There's nothing healthier for you than juicing organic veggies. And you know what? Don't start by buying the Cadillac juicer that's $9 million and, can make, whatever, a souffle. What you want to do is you want to buy something that you can use and clean in 4 minutes. And after 1 year of use of that, if it's into your habit now, then go buy the Cadillac. But in the meantime, just get some of that raw, alkalizing, enzyme-filled, vitamin, mineral, antioxidant-filled juice into you every day. And if you get into the habit of that, what if you missed a day? Is it a big deal? No, but how many of you would be willing to take a fish oil, a probiotic, and start juicing? And if any one of those don't feel comfortable, don't do it. Do something else that does. You can all do fresh fiber first. How many of you would be willing to go outside for 5 minutes a day? Now I'm going to ask something. I'm going to ask that you wear workout clothes when you go outside. I'm not telling you to work out. I'm just asking you, would you be willing to go outside, and when you're outside in your workout clothes, would you be willing to take some nice deep breaths in and out? Is everybody okay with that? And by the way, would you be willing to do this? Would you be willing to get your clothes together and set them up before you go to bed the night before every night? That's all I'm asking you to do, is set the clothes up, because it's going to program your subconscious mind. And then you don't have to say, I got to get up next day. You say, I got to go outside and breathe in some fresh air. Eventually, you'll get so bored, what will you do? You'll walk. But I don't care if it takes you 6 months. It's not important. The only thing is, would you go outside? Is that okay? Is that comfortable with everybody? Excellent. Never end or begin a day without gratitude. Never. When I go to bed at night, there's just never a day when I don't go to bed and I'm grateful for all the things I have in my life. I have some people in my life that are so fantastic. They're here. And I'm grateful for that every day. And I'm grateful for the opportunities I have. I'm grateful for the fact that people would come and listen to me and I could share the passion of my life, which is to help you have a better life for you and your children. That's a gift. We all have gifts. And if you don't think you have a gift, let me say that there's 1 million people right now living and raising children in a garbage dump in Egypt. That's where they live. We've all got something to be grateful for. So never begin or end a day without gratitude. Does that make sense? And it's so easy. You don't even have to get out of bed to do it. You can just sit there and be grateful. And if you do that every day for 30 days, you know what will happen automatically when you open your eyes every morning? The first thought into your mind will be what? Gratitude. I promise it will. The doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will interest patients in the care of the human frame, in diet, and the cause and prevention of disease. That was Thomas Edison. What a great quote. Thank you so much for your attention. If you stick around, I'll see you upstairs. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, Mom.